Good morning, YouTubers and fellow builders. I got a video that I've been looking forward to doing for a long time now, and that's sharing 7024 rod information, how to run these things, what you can use them on, all that kind of fun stuff. A lot of people either don't like these rods, never ran them, don't know how to use them, etc. I love these things for certain specific uses. This is not a rod that you can run uphill. The two position means flat and horizontal only. So real interesting rod, I love them. Let's talk about it. So right off the bat, I want to show you something that's pretty crazy. All of these are 1/8 inch rods. I got 60-10, 70-18, and then here is 70-24. And you look at the size difference of these. Massive size difference. And that comes from the flux coating. Obviously, since these are all 1/8 inch rods, it's the coating that's bigger. Now, 70-24 rods deposit a massive amount of metal. The flux actually helps turn into weld metal, and that's why you can deposit such big welds, despite the rods being all the same for these. An 1/8 inch 70-24 is actually pretty close, slightly under a 5/32 70-18. And both of them deposit about the same amount of metal, to be honest. Now 70-24, let me flip this so you guys can see it, -1. 70-24 is designed, as I said, only for flat position, so flat like this, or horizontal, so you can weld it in that manner. Now you're going to find horizontal is going to be a little bit harder, but you definitely don't want to run this stuff uphill or overhead. No bullshit, no lie. I had a welding instructor that he had an assignment sheet, and when you got halfway through the stick welding class, he made you try and run this uphill, and that was one of the assignments. I saw it in his sheet. It said 70-24, and then you put a check mark next to it as being done. Well, as soon as I saw that, I told him, he said, okay, 70-24 uphill. I told him, I said, hey, you can't do that. And he says, yeah, I know, and you know that, but guess what? You have to at least try it and show me the result in order to get it checked off. And I did it, and well, needless to say, it doesn't really weld. You get a molten metal like rainfall or waterfall coming off, so don't recommend it. Anyways, this rod is primarily used for stupidly thick plate. Like this is 3/8 thick. This is a great thickness to use on it, as well as quarter. Now you could probably use 3/16 thick and use a rod, 1/8 inch rod, but you're kind of pushing it on that. This is really meant for depositing a very large weld in the shortest amount of time on very thick material. Now they do make these in 332, and they do make them in even bigger. Like I think they make these suckers up to 1/4 inch, which I can't even imagine, the amount of weld that would put down. Another name for these is jet rod. That's what Lincoln calls them. If you're an old school dude and you worked in a shipyard, a lot of decks on ships were welded with these, from what I've read, because they put down huge welds and you just sit all day long just burning rod. The awesome thing about this is, I'm not lying, it's probably the easiest rod to run. It's easier than 60-13, far easier than 70-18. Like, if you can't weld and produce a decent looking stick weld, you could literally take this, set it with the stinger attached, strike the arc with another rod and just leave it, and it would literally probably make an acceptable looking weld. That is how easy this is to weld with. So what I'm going to do is fire up my machine. I'm going to set it for 155 amps, and then we're going to do a test weld and look at it. So we'll start with this 3/8 plate here, this angle iron. And we'll start at 155 amps, which obviously for an 1/8 inch rod is pretty ludicrous, but trust me, it'll handle it. I don't know what the max amperage is on these particular rods. It says 140 to 190 amps. So 150 is, or 55 is what I'm running. That's well in the ballpark of normal. Now these rods are Blue Demon rods. I got them off of Amazon a while ago. They're about $38 for a 5-pound pack, which sounds like a lot, but when you see the size weld that these deposit, it's actually, I would say, almost worth it, even though they are a little pricey. The local welding supply stores to you probably sell these. The problem is they generally only stock them in 50-pound tins, and I'll tell you what, if you better be making like 5 trailers or something, or a giant, tank, or even a ship if you want 50 pounds of these. I mean, that'll last you a lifetime of little home hobby projects, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. To me, like Home Depot, Lowe's, most other common places that you can get rods, Farm and Fleet we have here in Wisconsin, Tractor Supply, none of those guys sell 70-24 rods, unfortunately. So I can't get these anywhere pretty much other than online or the local welding supply store. Now to strike an arc with this, it starts pretty much like the easiest rod you've ever ran in your life. Now this one's already been used. There's never a slag ball or a silicone ball on the end like a 70-18. So it's probably the easiest rod to restart, like out of all of them, to be honest. So I'm gonna start it and run a hole weld the length of this. Try and get to where the camera can see it. I guess I'll do it, yeah. Let me angle this a little bit more. There we go, now I can do it. Oh, help if I took it off of AC. Which, by the way, this will run on AC. So you guys with a buzz box that want to lay down some metal, this will work for that. Now you could see my rod angle there got pretty wonky, and that's because the camera's right over here. So I'll tell you, that was kind of a pain in the ass, but I'll tell you what, this rod really doesn't care what your rod angle is, whether it's coming in from like this, doesn't matter. Very minimal spatter, and you know what, I'll show you. As this cools, generally you get some real nice slag peel off of this, so we'll just sit and watch it. Now, doesn't look like it's gonna go, but a couple little taps. Look at the size of that weld. Just to put things in perspective, this is a 70-14 weld. And you can see not only is it significantly wider, it's also significantly taller off the plate. So huge welds they put down, very easy rod to run. like I said earlier, it will run on AC or DCEP. It may run on DCEN. I don't know why you would want to run it on that. Yeah, no mention there. But for you guys that want to lay down a big weld on some thicker plate, this rod is everything you wanted, trust me on that. Now there's a couple issues besides the fact that you can't run it uphill and you can't run it overhead. This rod is very easy, probably the easiest rod besides 6013 I would say might be, well, this was worse than 6013, where if you're welding with it, it's very easy if your rod angle comes up like straight up and down, more like this. Straight up and down, you're gonna get flux running in front of your weld, and then you're gonna get slag inclusions and slag entrapment like you wouldn't believe with it. So that's a big downside to this rod. The other downside is that it's very difficult for a lot of people who are just starting out with this rod to be able to read the molten puddle, because there really isn't one. And when you see the arc footage, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's just, you pretty much have two colors. You have like a lighter red and a darker red, and somewhere between where those two colors turn from light to dark is your molten pool edge. And you essentially, to weld with this stuff, you just have to have very consistent travel speed and almost don't care where the molten puddle is. And you'll see what I mean in the arc footage. But what I'll do now, I'm gonna run one more pass right on top of this. And then I will switch and we'll do a pass with some arc footage. So that second pass, I pretty much welded right over the top of the first pass, which just makes it look like a much bigger weld. I hit it on that toe line. Well, you can see how wide that is. Flux, very easy to get off. I mean, realistically, it's probably the easiest flux to clean off out of any rod that you would run. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna cool this off in my bucket, and then we'll take a quick look, and then we'll go and shoot some arc footage. All right, there you go, a 2-pass weld. You can see where this bead just hit a little bit over. When you run this right down the toe line, it has a tendency to go up over. So this is one rod that wouldn't hurt if you weld a little bit off the toe line of the first. Now, just to put it in perspective, that's a solid 5/8, almost 3/4 inch wide weld with just 2 passes. And you can see how tall that is. I mean, that is a massive amount of metal for just 2 passes. If you were using 5/32 70/18s, I don't think 2 passes would even come close to that amount of metal. Now, these are also not low hydrogen rods, in case you were wondering. So these are not code for doing high strength steel or any kind of spec that requests a 70/18. So let's get set up and do some arc footage so you guys can see what I'm seeing. So you can see how easy it is to start, and the puddle is immediately like almost a 1/2 inch wide. Now the molten puddle, if you really look in there, you can kind of see where the edge is no longer liquid, but compared to pretty much every other rod, you can't really tell. Now, I can tell you that as I'm welding it, I don't really see that edge that you're seeing in this video. It's just, I go by the color where it goes from like a light tomato or red color, so a brighter color, to darker. That's essentially your molten pool. Like I'm telling you, you really can't make out that liquid area that you see following the rod. It's almost indistinguishable from everything else when you're actually welding. Make sure you eat the slag peel. It's got your welder nutrients in there. No, don't do that. So this pass, I slowed down just to show you in a single pass, you can easily do 1/2 inch wide on this, but a single rod did not make it the whole length. And just to give you an idea, I'm not sure how long this is. So this is about 8 1/4. So the slower your travel speed and the more rod you push in there, the wider the weld gets and the more metal you deposit. So my first pass, which granted it was on a cold plate, deposited, I would say, about 1/3 less metal, but by slowing down your travel speed and feeding more rod in, you can really make a real wide, big weld, but at the expense that one rod only made it to there versus a previous pass I made it to the end. As you saw in that arc footage, this is a fairly difficult rod to see the molten puddle on. I mean, there really isn't one per se. I mean, hopefully, you know, you saw it good enough in the arc footage to see how like there's that light and dark area. I mean, that pretty much differentiates what's liquid and what's not. And even then, it's still somewhat liquid quite a ways back. And that's why you can't run this uphill or overhead. It's so liquidy that you need it to sit on something essentially. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to cool this plate off, buff it up, and we're going to do an actual weld where I'm going to weld a piece of 1/4 inch plate to this. So I got this piece of 1/4 inch plate tacked onto this 3/8, which when you look at this, pretty crazy. It's about 1/4 inch with the flux. I'm going to run this pass. I'm going to try and do it at 155 amps. This out here, I'll probably drop to maybe 145 or so. I'm not really sure. I'm going to see how well this welds first to make a determination. Now, you don't want to come in here with this rod angle. If you even think about pushing this, you're done. You're going to want a fairly steep drag angle to try and get what little bit of arc force this has to keep that molten puddle pushed that way rather than having it come in front of your rod, because you're going to get slag entrapment terribly with that. And you're going to watch that puddle's really going to swirl around and kind of do its own thing. You just have to trust that if your travel speed is good and you're feeding enough rod, that everything is okay, because it's not like 7018, it has a really distinguishable puddle. This simply doesn't. So there is a little bit of trust involved in getting this to work right. All right, let's weld this up. All right, so if you watch that molten puddle, you can see it's about twice the length as the rod is wide with flux. So you can kind of see it trailing the rod. But like I said, to me welding it, I can't really see that, to be honest. So I'm just basing it off the lighter to dark area for travel speed and for amperage. But everything's looking real good here. A weld really doesn't get better than this. If you look at the heat affected zone lines and how easy this comes off, it just falls off basically. No spatter, and then one pass 1/4 inch to 3/8. So for this pass, I lowered the amperage a little bit, which I probably should have kept it where it was. And at this point, I'm not pushing enough rod in. And you're gonna watch how that puddle is going to kind of neck down a little bit, and it's not quite filling it the way that I want it to, and the puddle's going to kind of start changing weird shapes. Once I get ahead and really cram the rod, like start feeding it more rod in there, it seems to wet out a lot better. Like right there, you can see how it's getting a lot wider on the trailing part of the puddle. That's what you want. And I just simply wasn't pushing enough rod at the start. And you probably notice a change in the sound it made as the arc got tighter because there's more molten metal. Quite the slag peel, huh? I'll show you what we got here. So the first pass I did, which is on this thicker part here, 155 amps, shoved in plenty of rod. I mean, it was like melting a pretty big crayon into a hot skillet. Very nice profile, filled up right to the edge. I mean, it pretty much was melting the edge over and making it into part of the weld. If you look here, doesn't really get much better than that. Looks like there's like undercut or whatever. That's just the top weld. It's actually up over the plate a little bit. That's not undercut. So very good looking weld. And I want to tell you that this thing burned that 1/4 inch plate in there in probably twice the time that a 5/32 7018 would have. Like the travel speed, it's almost like the more rod you push in, the faster you can go. So it's pretty crazy. Unless you ran this rod, you wouldn't really know what I'm saying. Like it's a totally different animal from 7018. Now this side ran a little bit rougher. I made 2 mistakes. One, I downed the amperage from 155 to like 148. I should have kept it the same. And 2, the first about third, I didn't push enough rod in, and I saw the puddle kind of swirling around a little different, and then somewhere about right here, I really started feeding more rod in, and then it finished up like this part, exactly like what you want. This little bit too much spatter, just because, again, I should have left the amperage where it was. It was running good enough. I mean, I could have even increased the amperage here and fed more rod, but you get the idea. And that's 1/4 inch plate on 3/8. You know, massive deposition. And like I said, for me, it runs really good, really easy rod to run. It's just your travel speed has to be fast, and you have to push rod in, just like melting a crayon off on a skillet. Now this side, what you saw, as the plate got a little bit heated, and I did cool this down between passes, but the more rod you push, the wider your single pass weld will be. And that's why this is such a popular rod. Like I've heard guys that weld tanks together, as in like storage tanks, or hell, probably real life tanks, like armored tanks for the military. You run a single pass super wide. It's not really that great a penetration. I will be doing a video showing the penetration of all the common rods coming up, and this will be one of them, but I'm not going to cut and etch this for the time being. But you know, pretty mild penetration, but super wide, high deposition welds. Pretty awesome. All right, let's go and finish this video up. Well, there really isn't much more to say other than what I've already said about this. I've heard that these Blue Demons don't run as good as the Jet Rod from Lincoln. Now, when I was in school, I used Jet Rod and obviously not Blue Demon, but I find these run pretty good. I don't really have any issue with them. But the only reliable source that I've found to get these in a smaller pack is Amazon from Blue Demon, and that's what I ran here, and I like the way they run. Very clean weld. If you're welding under about 3/16, you can pretty much thick material, you can forget about this rod. Even though they do make smaller than 1/8 inch rods, like honestly, this is really meant for 1/4 inch thick steel and above to just get the job done in a hurry. If you haven't ran these, I really recommend picking some up, but understand that it's a little bit tricky to run, but once you get the hang of it, I'm telling you, it's a time saver, and it makes pretty looking welds. I mean, honestly, it's the best looking stick weld in my opinion. I mean, it's just a nice, smooth, shiny, pure silver bead. So anytime I got some heavy duty welding I need to do, or really good, if I did a tow truck boom. You saw in a video I uploaded recently, I did a tow truck boom where it had to weld wear plates. Well, I did another boom where it was so badly wore that I ended up using 70-24 and running about 20 passes down it, and then hard face on top of that. And I'm telling you, it cut so much of the time out to build up metal. It was awesome in that respect, but flat position only, you know, that's it. And like I said before, it's not a low hydrogen rod, so don't be using this stuff for code work. But all you home gamers out there, kind of like me, like, it wouldn't hurt to have some of these around for some job. You never know when this might come in handy. And honestly, if I had to pick my favorite obscure rod, or even not even obscure rod, this is definitely top, I'd almost say top 3 rods out of everything I've ever used. I mean, I like 70-18 and 60-10, but I'll tell you what, this rod I really like running. I don't know why a lot of people hate it, but that's them and I'm me. So anyways, thanks for sticking around for the video. If you got any comments, questions, you know where to put them. Thanks, guys.